There is a moment in the grand theater of power when the laughter dies, when the painted smile of the jester cracks, not in despair, but in revelation. Behind the motley and the mockery, behind the pratfalls and the pranks, there lies an intelligence sharp as a dagger, a will coiled like a serpent in the rafters of the court. The jester, long dismissed as a fool, knows something the king does not, that the throne is an illusion, and the crown is only as heavy as the hands that believe in its weight. This is where Machiavelli's shadow creeps into the spotlight. Not the Machiavelli of dry political treatises, but the Machiavelli who understood power as a performance, who saw in the jester's antics the same ruthless calculus that governs kings. For what is a ruler if not a performer who has convinced the world of his right to rule? And what is a jester if not the one who exposes that fragile fiction with a well-timed joke? From Jester to King is not merely a study of political ascent. It is an excavation of the hidden alchemy that turns mockery into mastery, that transforms the fool into the sovereign. Consider the court jester, that paradoxical figure who is both powerless and untouchable. He speaks truths that would cost a nobleman his head, dances along the edge of treason with impunity, and does it all under the guise of entertainment. The jester's immunity is his disguise. His absurdity is his armor. But what happens when the jester tires of laughter? When he realizes that the same mechanisms that allow him to mock the king could, if wielded differently, allow him to become the king. Machiavelli, that cunning observer of human nature, would have recognized the jester's potential immediately. In The Prince, he writes of the necessity of deception, of the strategic use of appearances to manipulate perception. The jester already excels in this art. His entire existence is a carefully constructed deception, a performance of harmlessness that masks his true insight. The transition from jester to king is not a leap, but a pivot, a shift from undermining authority to embodying it. Yet this transformation is not merely about ambition. It is about the nature of power itself. Power does not reside in the crown, nor in the scepter, nor in the edicts of law. Power resides in belief, in the collective agreement that someone has the right to rule. The jester, by his very role, understands this better than anyone. He has spent his life exposing the absurdity of power, revealing its constructed nature. And in that revelation lies the seed of usurpation. If power is a fiction, then why should he not rewrite the story? History whispers of such figures, men and women who rose from the margins of ridicule to the center of command. The Roman Emperor Nero, who played the lyre while Rome burned, was first a spectacle before he was a tyrant. Medieval court fools, through wit and cunning, became trusted advisors, and then, in some cases, the hidden hands behind the throne. Even in modern times, the archetype persists. The comedian who becomes the politician, the satirist who transitions from mocking power to wielding it. The line between jest and dominion is thinner than we admit. But this is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a mirror held up to our own world, where the boundaries between entertainment and authority blur daily. In an age where social media clowns ascend to political influence, where memes shape public opinion more effectively than policy papers, the jester's path to kingship is more relevant than ever. The tools have changed. The court is now digital. The laughter is algorithmically amplified, but the game remains the same. So we begin here, at the intersection of laughter and dominion, where the fool's cap hides a crown in waiting. This is not just a study of power, but of transformation, of how the most underestimated figures in the room can become the most dangerous. The jester does not conquer through force, but through perception. He does not seize the throne. He convinces the world that it was always his. Myths and dreams are the language of the unconscious, and in their labyrinthine symbolism, we find echoes of Jung's brutal truth about powerlessness. Consider the ancient tale of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descends into the underworld, stripped of her jewels, her crown, and finally her very flesh, until she stands naked and broken before her dark sister, Ereshkigal. This is no mere story of defeat. It is an allegory of initiation. Inanna's powerlessness is not her end, but her rebirth. She must surrender every layer of her identity to pass through the gates of the underworld. And in that surrender, she discovers a sovereignty far deeper than the superficial power she once wielded. Jung would recognize this journey instantly. The ego, like a nana, must be dismantled before the self can be remade. Then there is the alchemical process of nigredo, the blackening, where base matter is reduced to its primordial state, a chaotic, formless mass that seems devoid of value. To the untrained eye, it is pure destruction. But the alchemists understood it as the necessary first step toward transformation. So too with the psyche. When we are plunged into the nigredo of powerlessness, when relationships crumble, when purpose evaporates, when the body or mind betrays us, we are not being punished. We are being dissolved. The old structures of meaning must decay so that something more resilient can emerge. Jung saw this as a universal pattern. Darkness precedes dawn, chaos births order, and the feeling of being utterly lost is often the prelude to finding a true path. Even nature whispers this truth. The caterpillar's dissolution in the chrysalis is not a graceful metamorphosis but a near-total liquefaction. A cellular unraveling that looks, for all intents and purposes, like death. Yet from this soup of disintegration, wings form. The creature that could only crawl is remade into one that can fly. Here, the symbolism is unmistakable. Powerlessness is not the opposite of transformation. It is its raw material. The ego clings to the safety of the ground, but the soul knows that to become what we are meant to be, we must first endure the terror of the in-between, that liminal space where nothing is certain and everything is possible. These narratives are not escapist fantasies. They are maps. They show us that the anguish of powerlessness has always been part of the human journey, not as a flaw to be remedied, but as a sacred passage. The question is not how to avoid the descent, but how to meet it. Will we rage against the stripping away of our illusions? Or will we, like a nana, let the underworld do its work? Will we see the nigredo as a curse, or as the first stirrings of gold in the alchemist's flask? The symbols are clear. What feels like an ending is often the unseen beginning of a story too vast for the uninitiated to comprehend. To translate Jung's insights from the realm of myth into the pulse of daily existence is to recognize that powerlessness is not some abstract philosophical dilemma. It is the quiet tremor in your hands when faced with a decision you cannot control. The hollow ache of grief that refuses to be rationalized away. The frustration of societal systems that seem designed to remind you of your smallness. The challenge is not to transcend these feelings but to mine them for their hidden potency. Imagine a potter at the wheel. The clay resists, slips, collapses under unskilled hands. Yet the artisan knows that this resistance is not failure. It is dialogue. So too with powerlessness. It is the psyche's way of signaling where we are being called to grow, where our old ways of being no longer serve us. Consider the simple act of setting boundaries, an often misunderstood exercise of power. Many assume that to be powerful is to never need boundaries, to be impervious to the demands of others. But Jung's framework reveals the opposite. True strength emerges when we acknowledge our limits. The person who can say no from a place of self-awareness, rather than guilt or fear, is not contracting their world but expanding it. They are no longer fighting the exhaustion of overextension, no longer pouring from an empty cup. This is powerlessness transformed into agency, not through domination, but through discernment. Similarly, in moments of collective uncertainty, economic instability, political unrest, environmental crises, the Jungian approach does not advocate for blind optimism or passive despair, but for the courage to stand in the tension, to ask, what is this revealing about what we've ignored? What shadows are being forced into the light? Even the rituals of modern life can become vessels for this integration. Therapy, journaling, meditation. These are not mere self-help tools but contemporary forms of alchemy. When you sit with a therapist and articulate a long-buried shame, you are performing your own nigredo, breaking down the leaden weight of silence into something malleable. When you meditate and observe your thoughts without judgment, you are practicing the art of holding the tension between opposites. The very process Jung believed was necessary for psychological growth. And in the mundane, The act of pausing before reacting in anger, of choosing curiosity over defensiveness when criticized, of allowing yourself to rest without guilt. These are the microscopic rebellions against the tyranny of false power. The societal implications run even deeper. In a culture that equates worth with productivity, admitting fragility is revolutionary. Movements that embrace vulnerability, from mental health advocacy to disability justice, are not signs of societal weakness but of collective maturation. They echo Jung's insistence that the way forward is not to deny our shadows but to integrate them. When a community acknowledges its historical wounds instead of burying them, when leaders admit fallibility rather than clinging to the facade of infallibility, they are embodying the very principles that transform powerlessness from a liability into a crucible for change. The systems that fear this vulnerability are the ones that crumble under their own rigidity, while those that adapt, that honor the full spectrum of human experience, are the ones that endure. Beneath the surface of courtly laughter lies a deeper drama, one that plays out not just in palaces but in the very architecture of human consciousness. The jester's journey from mockery to mastery is no mere political strategy. It is an archetypal transformation encoded in our myths, our dreams, and the secret language of power. To understand this metamorphosis, we must look beyond the obvious and into the symbolic realm where masks reveal more than they conceal. Consider the ancient tale of the trickster gods, Loki weaving chaos through Asgard, Anansi spinning webs of deception, Coyote remaking the world through his endless schemes. These figures, like our court jester, operate in the liminal spaces between order and chaos, their apparent foolishness masking profound wisdom. The Norse god Odin himself, the All-Father, often wandered Midgard disguised as a ragged wanderer, gathering knowledge through deception. Here we see the first great paradox. The highest wisdom often wears the cloak of madness. In medieval courts, the jester's traditional bauble mirrored the royal orb, one a toy, the other a symbol of divine right. Yet both were hollow, both filled with nothing but the air of belief that gave them weight. The carnival traditions of Europe reveal another layer of this truth. During the Feast of Fools, hierarchies were temporarily inverted. Peasants ruled as kings, clergy parroted sacred rites, and the world turned upside down. But what most observers miss is how these sanctioned rebellions ultimately reinforced the very structures they seemed to mock. The jester's temporary reign served as a pressure valve, allowing the steam of discontent to escape without ever threatening the foundations of power. This is the second great paradox. True subversion often strengthens what it appears to undermine. The wise jester understands this dynamic instinctively, recognizing that to overthrow the king, one must first become essential to the court's equilibrium. Alchemy provides perhaps the richest symbolic language for this transformation. The fool in the tarot, numbered 0, stands at the precipice of his journey, his gaze turned upward while unknowingly about to step off a cliff. This image captures the jester's dangerous wisdom, his apparent lack of direction masking an intuitive understanding of the currents of power. The alchemical process of solvet coagula, dissolution and reconstitution, mirrors the jester's path. First, he dissolves the certainties of the court through mockery, then reconstitutes them with himself at the center. The base metal of his foolishness becomes the gold of authority through the philosopher's stone of perception management. Shakespeare's fools, particularly the wise fools like King Lear's companion, demonstrate this transformation in action. They speak in riddles that contain uncomfortable truths, their apparent nonsense serving as a mirror to reflect the madness of those in power. When Lear's fool disappears from the play just as the king begins his descent into actual madness, we witness the symbolic transfer of wisdom from the sanctioned truth-teller to the crumbling monarch. The fool's absence becomes more powerful than his presence, a vacuum that draws all meaning toward it. This is the essence of the jester's strategy, to make himself so indispensable to the court's self-understanding that his eventual absence creates an existential crisis only he can resolve. Eastern traditions offer parallel insights. The Zen concept of the holy fool, the enlightened master who behaves erratically to shock students out of conventional thinking, shows how apparent irrationality can be the highest form of wisdom. In Chinese philosophy, the concept of wu wei, action through non-action, finds its perfect embodiment in the jester who rules by seeming not to rule. The Taoist sage Chuang's parable of the butcher whose knife never dulls because he cuts along the natural lines of the meat illustrates the jester's approach to power. He does not oppose structures directly, but finds the hidden seams where pressure can be most effectively applied. Modern psychology reveals another dimension through the concept of cognitive dissonance. The jester's humor creates a gap between what the court believes and what it experiences, a tension that demands resolution. When the jester transitions to power, he doesn't present himself as the solution to a crisis. He becomes the only imaginable resolution to the cognitive dissonance he himself has created. This psychological alchemy transforms laughter into loyalty, mockery into reverence. The court doesn't feel conquered. It feels relieved to have found someone who can make sense of the chaos. The most profound symbolic narrative may be the cosmic one. In many creation myths, the world emerges from divine laughter or playful chaos. The Hindu deity Shiva dances the universe into being even as he dances it out of existence. This cosmic play, Lila, reflects the jester's dual role as both creator and destroyer of realities. When the jester becomes king, he doesn't merely take power, he reshapes the very narrative fabric of the kingdom, becoming both author and protagonist in a story where his ascent appears inevitable. The court becomes his stage, the nobles his supporting cast, and history itself his playwright. The transition from jester to king is not confined to medieval courts or ancient myths. It unfolds daily in boardrooms, political campaigns, and digital landscapes where perception is the ultimate currency. To understand how these dynamics operate in our world, we must examine the subtle mechanics by which humor disarms, chaos reshapes hierarchies, and apparent foolishness becomes undeniable authority. The modern jester does not wear motley. He wears tailored suits or casual hoodies, speaks in viral tweets rather than courtly jests, and wields algorithms instead of a jingling scepter. Yet the principles remain unchanged. Consider the political strategist who adopts self-deprecating humor to deflect criticism while quietly consolidating influence. The technique is ancient: disarm through laughter, then redirect attention toward more calculated maneuvers. A leader who can laugh at himself becomes paradoxically harder to attack, his vulnerability transformed into strength. The moment his opponents attempt to critique him seriously, they appear humorless, out of touch, the very reaction he engineered. This is the jester's first practical law. Laughter neutralizes resistance before resistance can crystallize. The court jester mocked the king to his face and lived. The modern influencer does the same to institutions, brands, and rivals, eroding their gravitas while elevating his own relevance. Corporate environments reveal another dimension of this playbook. The employee who positions themselves as the office comedian often gains access to conversations and decisions from which more overtly ambitious colleagues are excluded. Why? Because humor creates trust, or at least, the illusion of it. The jester is perceived as harmless, even when his jokes carry barbs aimed at shifting power dynamics. Over time, his commentary shapes narratives, his jokes become insider wisdom, and his casual suggestions morph into company policy. This is the second practical law. Those who appear least threatening are granted the most access. The boardroom, like the royal court, is a stage, and the jester's greatest skill is ensuring he remains in every scene while never seeming like the lead, until suddenly, he is. Digital culture has amplified these dynamics exponentially. Social media clowns, those who build followings through absurdity, irony, or deliberate provocation, often transition from mockery to influence with startling speed. The pattern is recursive. They ridicule existing power structures, position themselves as outsiders, and then, once their audience is sufficiently conditioned, step into the vacuum they helped create. Memes become manifestos. Shitposts become slogans. The third practical law emerges here. Chaos is only valuable if you control its resolution. The troll who evolves into a thought leader does so by first dismantling the old frameworks of credibility, then offering himself as the only logical anchor in the storm. Even revolutionary movements follow this arc. The most effective disruptors are rarely the stern ideologues. They are the ones who wrap subversion in satire, making dissent palatable before making it potent. The jester's role in protest movements is often overlooked, yet it is critical. By framing resistance as humor, he expands its reach. By making power ridiculous, he makes it vulnerable. But the true masters of this game know that mockery alone is not enough. It must be followed by a new narrative, one in which the jester is no longer just the critic, but the natural successor. This is the fourth practical law. You cannot destroy a king without becoming the alternative. The dangers of this playbook are as real as its opportunities. A court that replaces a tyrant with a jester may find the new ruler's methods less overt but no less controlling. When humor becomes institutionalized, dissent can be dismissed as mere irreverence, criticism as a failure to take a joke. The Jester King's regime often masks its authority behind a veneer of populism, claiming to speak for the people while carefully filtering which voices are truly heard. This is the shadow side of the jester's ascent. The most effective authoritarianism is the kind that doesn't look like authoritarianism at all. For those who wish to navigate this landscape, whether to harness its strategies or resist its manipulations, the lessons are clear. First, recognize that humor is never just humor. It is a social solvent, capable of dissolving hierarchies or reinforcing them, depending on who wields it. Second, understand that the loudest voices are not always the most powerful. The jester's greatest moves are often the quietest. The shifts in tone, the carefully timed silence after a joke that lands too well. Third, be wary of those who demand you not take things so seriously. That phrase is often the first tool in undermining dissent. The call to transformation here is not merely about acquiring power, but about seeing through its illusions. The jester's ultimate lesson is that all authority is, to some degree, a collective act of imagination. To free oneself from undue influence, one must first recognize the mechanisms of that influence. The laughter that disarms, the chaos that distracts, the apparent humility that masks ambition. And perhaps, in that recognition, there is an opportunity to rewrite the script rather than merely recast the roles. This brings us to our final contemplation. The jester becomes king not because he is the strongest, but because he is the most adaptable. In a world where narratives are fragile and perception is fluid, the true power belongs to those who understand that the crown is never just a crown. It is a story waiting to be retold.